Hi everyone, and welcome to the second week of Be Bold, our Easter study on the book of Acts. Before we dive into this week's readings, I have a confession to make. Last week, I said that all of the women we will encounter in Acts boldly testified about Jesus. I completely forgot about Sapphira, so for that, I am sorry. Now, let's dive into this week's text. For this week, our readings cover a lot of material. So we're reading Acts 4:32 through 8:24, and there's a lot happening. We get our first glimpses of the early Christian community in Jerusalem, and it's important to note that these are still practicing Jews. We haven't separated into a separate religion yet. We see problems within this community. Stephen becomes the first martyr who's actually killed for his faith. We get a brief glimpse of localized persecution of Christians under Saul. And we get the account of an early Christian mission to Samaria. So this video is going to focus on the community and problems within that community. When reading about this community, we need to remember that it's one example of an early Christian community. Not all communities functioned like this. There was no standard, and there still isn't. So in this community, the hierarchy that was set by the wider culture doesn't apply. Everyone's equal. It doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor. If you're rich, you're giving all of your money to the community. And if you're poor, your needs are being met, probably for the first time ever. In many ways, it sounds like the ideal community. You get what you need, and so does everyone else. However, no community is without its problems. So the first problem arises when Ananias and Sapphira sell some land, and they hold some money back for themselves instead of giving all of it to the community. Now, somehow, Peter finds out that they've been holding money back, and when he questions Ananias about it, Ananias dies on the spot. And so members from their community are there, and like that, they go and they bury him. Now, somehow, his wife does not know that this has happened, and she goes to Peter. And Peter asks her, "Is this all the money? Did you give us all the money?" And she says, "Oh yes, absolutely, we gave you all the money." And she dies on the spot. And people from the community are there, and they go and they bury her next to her husband. Now, this story probably makes us a little uncomfortable. We, as people, tend to get uncomfortable when God acts violently because we don't like to think of our loving God as being violent. However, if we read through our scriptures, God is both violent and loving. And I also think this makes us a little uncomfortable as Lutherans because no one's given a chance to repent and have their sins forgiven. They're just killed on the spot. But we need to remember that Acts wasn't written to a group of Lutherans. Now, I'd like to present an alternative interpretation to this story, not because I have a problem with God being violent, but because Acts tends to be a little overly dramatic. So, did Ananias and Sapphira sell land and withhold money? Absolutely. They messed up. Now, did they die on the spot? Maybe not. Perhaps what really happened is that they were kicked out of their community and never allowed back in. Rather than being literally dead and buried, they were dead to the community. So for one reason or another, Ananias and Sapphira are no longer in this community, either because they're literally dead or metaphorically dead. However, this community still has problems. A fight arises between Greek-speaking Jews and Aramaic-speaking Jews in the community. So the Greek-speaking Jews claim that their widows aren't receiving a fair share. And the apostles, instead of dealing with this issue themselves, tell the people to appoint 7 men who are wise and full of the Spirit to oversee this distribution of food to the widows, because the apostles want to keep praying and studying. And this group of 7 will eventually become the diaconate. So what we see here is a really early example of Christians answering the call, and whatever that is, in doing what they're called to do the best way they can. So the apostles are called to pray and to study and to teach, and that's what they do. And so now these 7 are called to community service, and that's what they do. And so as we read Acts, I'm going to caution against turning the early Christian community mentioned here into an ideal. The church has always had problems and will always have problems because, well, as people, we're flawed and we make mistakes. I'd also caution against reading too much into the persecution stories in Acts. So persecution in the early church was very localized. And it either came from people within your own community, as was the case with Stephen, or from government officials. So like a local governor would say, we're going to do whatever the thing is to these people. And we see that when Saul goes into people's homes and removes residents. And it wouldn't be until years after Acts was written that there would be an empire-wide persecution of Christians. And so we have a lot of ideas and myths and legends surrounding Christian persecution, and we need to be careful with those. Please don't Google anything about Christian persecution in the early church. I tried it just to see what would happen. There's a lot out there. A lot of it is not good. If you want to read more about it, please let me know and I will suggest some books. And so that is all from me for this week. Stay home, stay safe, and don't forget to comment with your questions. Bye.